I'm producing two main animals here. I'm producing dairy animals and meat animals. So I actually right now I'm using two different kinds of rams. I have the dairy ram, and then I have the meat or fiber ram. And what I've done, this is kind of a new experiment just as last year, was the highest milk producing ewes, about the top half of the flock that are producing milk at the highest rate, get bred to the dairy ram. And the ewe lambs out of those ewes are the ones, presumably, that I would keep as replacements for the milking flock. The lower producing half of the flock, they got bred to the meat/fiber ram. I know I'm not going to keep replacements from those ewes to be in the milking flock, so I may as well get some nice fiber and meat quality out of them. Although our dairy ram produces fine meat quality as well. So from the dairy ram, I'll keep replacement ewe lambs. Everyone else gets raised for meat. So when we start breeding in the fall, we're usually still out on pasture. I'll have determined which ewes I want to go with which ram, and I'll have sorted groups accordingly. With the rams, I like to have them mark the ewes when they breed. And you can buy marking harnesses for that have kind of a crayon in them, and it's a harness that they wear and has a little box with a crayon on that rides on their breastbone. So then when they mount a ewe, they leave a mark on her rump. I just use regular livestock marking crayons, and I just rub them heavily on the ram's breastbone, so he's got a bunch of greasy crayon on his breastbone. So then when he mounts a ewe, he leaves a mark, a colored mark on her rump. And I record that. I actually go out to the pasture at least once a day and record breedings, because what I like to do is create a lambing schedule based on that breeding. I like to know when everyone is going to lamb. So I think that's really helpful. I do not preg check the ewes. I assume if they've bred that they're pregnant. And that's generally proven to be correct as long as you have a ram that is fertile. Most ewes twin. Twinning is the most common, but singletons and triplets are also quite regular. You'll have quads and quins on occasion, but hopefully not, in my opinion. When we begin lambing, the animals are still in the barn, and that's just because of the timing that we've established for when we want to do things. The grass isn't really on yet. We'll generally finish our lambing out on pasture, but we start in the barnyard. And I actually kind of like that. It's very, very easy. Some people are really passionate about lambing on pasture, and our ewes do fine both ways. So it just depends on the schedule they come in on. Our hay barn is generally fairly empty by the time we are starting to lamb. The hay barn is adjacent to the main sheep quarters. So what I've done is, based on my schedule that I have, I move ewes when they're imminent to lamb into the hay barn area, which is away from the mating crowd of the sheep, so they have more space, and let them just lamb on a bedding pack there. After they've lambed, then I usually put them into a jug, which is a small enclosure, with their lambs for a day or two. Lets them bond, lets me get close to them, make sure everybody's doing well. When we lamb out in the pasture, I usually go out at least twice a day and just observe who's doing what. And I have my schedule, so I know when ewes are going to lamb. So I'll go out and see who's lambing, who has lambed. I let the ewe pretty much take care of cleaning up the lambs. I don't want to interfere too much at first. I want the lambs to mother on well. I will often squirt a couple of squirts of milk from the ewe, though, immediately. The ewes develop a waxy plug in their teats during their dry period. And usually the lamb is able to suck that out when they first start nursing. But some of them are really tough. And some of the lambs kind of give up. So I like to make sure the milk is flowing freely so when the lambs mother on, they can nurse really well. Usually the first thing I do when I've found a ewe having lambed is I'll dip the navels of the lambs in a strong iodine solution. It's a 7% iodine solution. That just helps cut down on any infection the lambs might get through their umbilicus. After the lambs have been cleaned up by the mother and I know they're up and nursing, and this is just all observation, then usually within 24 hours I will tag, castrate, tail dock, and weigh. We often don't keep any replacement males in our flock. Because our flock is so small, we really have to bring in genetics fairly regularly, and the way we do that usually is with rams. I am keeping one ram lamb this year because he's a really nice fiber animal, and so I know I can get some nice fiber lambs out of him. But generally, I'm castrating pretty much all my males. That's the first thing I do, because if you stress the lamb too much, they will draw their testicles up out of their scrotum, and it makes it a little bit harder to do. So I do that first to catch them unawares before I start manhandling them. So the elastrator I use has a little locking mechanism that allows you to lock it in an open position. I also find it's helpful when I'm using the elastrator to castrate to move the rubber band more toward the tips of the pins that hold the rubber band. It's easier to slide off on the scrotum that way. I feel to make sure both testicles are descended. And if you handle the lamb too roughly, they will pull those testicles back up into their body cavity, and you may have to manually push them back down. But it's best if you're just gentle. The lamb doesn't really know what you're doing. That's really the best way to do it. And then once you're confident that you have both testicles in the scrotum, then you release the elastrator and slide the band off.
Is this him, Mama? There he is, Mama.
I use that same tool for tail banding. This year, I'm only tail banding ewe lambs that I plan to keep for the milking flock. Because I milk between their hind legs, I don't want a big long tail flapping away at me while I'm milking. I weigh the lamb with a bucket and a hanging scale. I kind of tip the lamb into a bucket and just pick up the bucket by the scale. And I write down the weights of the lambs, the ewe that they came from, the ram that sired them. So I write all that in my little book, and so I always have that for reference. Because we're a dairy, we want to milk these sheep. We don't want the lambs to get all of the milk. So we wean lambs at about a month of age and then start milking the ewes. But we have several criteria that we apply, and the lamb has to meet all the criteria before they get weaned. They have to be a minimum of 1 month of age, and they have to weigh at least, it used to be 25 pounds, but now we say 30 pounds. A minimum of 30 pounds live weight, and they have to have vigor. If a lamb is not vigorous and 30 pounds and at least 30 days of age, they don't get weaned. So, but we find if they meet those criteria, we basically cold turkey wean them. We just take them away from their mother and we establish a new flock. It's a lamb flock. And they go graze separately. The first 2 days are hell. It's a lot of screaming on the part of the lambs and the ewes, and therefore the shepherd. But we get through it, and then everyone moves along very, very well. When we do our weaning, we usually do it in 2 groups. So we'll kind of wait till we feel like we have a big enough group of lambs that are going to meet those 3 criteria. We'll go through, weigh everybody, get one big group, wean them, and then a couple weeks later, we'll do the second half of the group. Because some lambs are going to grow slower than others. Triplets will be slower to reach those criteria than a singleton. So yeah, we do it in 2 groups. We like to have our lambing window be as small as possible. And last year's lambing window was basically 1 heat cycle. It was 16 or 17 days, and that was just excellent. Because some ewes got bred on the very first day of breeding, but they were just coming out of their cycle. So they got bred on the very, best time in their next cycle. So that's best, really, the smallest lambing window possible. It's a good indicator of health of your animals if you have a small lambing window, because everyone's cycling, everyone's breeding properly, so it's a good thing to watch for.